Marcus Chen pressed his face against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching the massive cargo hauler disappear into the star-speckled void. The ship's engines cast brilliant blue trails across space before fading to nothing more than distant pinpricks of light. He was alone now on Kepler Station, orbiting the gas giant Xerion Prime, with nothing but recycled air and the hum of life support systems for company. The station had been a thriving research outpost just 6 months ago, home to over 300 scientists and support staff studying the unique electromagnetic phenomena generated by Xerion's twin moons. Then the Hegemony War started, and everything changed overnight. Resources were redirected to the war effort, funding dried up, and personnel were evacuated to more strategically important locations. Marcus had volunteered to stay behind as the sole caretaker, mainly because he had nowhere else to go. His contract with the Galactic Research Consortium had another 8 months to run, and breaking it would cost him more credits than he could earn in 2 years. Besides, someone needed to maintain the automated systems and ensure the station didn't drift into Xerion's gravity well. He made his way through the eerily quiet corridors, his footsteps echoing off the metal walls. The station felt like a ghost ship now, with only emergency lighting casting long shadows between the empty laboratories and abandoned living quarters. He'd grown accustomed to the silence over the past week, but it still sent chills down his spine when he ventured into the unused sections. Marcus was heading to the communications array to send his daily status report when an alarm began blaring throughout the station. Red warning lights flashed in the corridors as an automated voice announced, "Unidentified vessel approaching. Hull breach detected in docking bay 7. He raced to the nearest control terminal and pulled up the external cameras. A sleek ship, unlike anything in the consortium database, was drifting toward the station with obvious damage to its hull. Debris trailed behind it, and he could see atmosphere venting from multiple breaches. The vessel was definitely not human in origin. Its organic curves and crystalline panels suggested it belonged to one of the dragon-like species from the Andromeda sector. Marcus had studied xenobiology during his university years and recognized the distinctive biomechanical design aesthetic of the Draconian Empire. Their ships were grown rather than built, using a combination of living tissue and crystalline matrices that could heal themselves under the right conditions. This one looked badly wounded, its bioluminescent panels flickering weakly like a dying heartbeat. The ship scraped against the docking bay's outer hull as it attempted to land, sending vibrations through the station's superstructure. Marcus watched through the bay's internal cameras as the vessel settled onto the landing platform with a grinding sound of twisted metal and damaged biotech. Steam hissed from ruptured conduits as the ship's systems finally powered down. He grabbed an emergency medical kit and a portable atmosphere generator from the supply lockers, then made his way to docking bay 7. The bay's blast doors were designed to contain hull breaches automatically, but he could see through the thick, transparent aluminum that the visiting ship was leaking various fluids onto the deck plating. Whatever was inside might not have much time left. Marcus activated the bay's emergency atmosphere recyclers and waited for the environment to stabilize before entering. The alien ship's hull had split open along its dorsal ridge, revealing the organic interior structure that looked more like the inside of a massive rib cage than a traditional spacecraft. Bioluminescent panels pulsed weakly along the walls, providing just enough light to see by. He climbed carefully through the breach in the hull, his boots squelching on some kind of organic padding that lined the floor. The ship's interior was warm and humid, with a sweet scent that reminded him of flowering vines. Everything was curved and flowing, as if the entire vessel had been shaped by natural forces rather than engineering tools. Following the main corridor deeper into the ship, Marcus found what appeared to be the bridge or command center. It was a circular chamber with a raised platform in the center, surrounded by curved panels that looked like they belonged in some kind of living organism. and lying motionless on the platform was a dragon. She was magnificent and terrible at the same time. Her scales shimmered between deep emerald and midnight blue, catching the faint light from the dying biopanels and reflecting it in rainbow patterns across the chamber walls. She was easily 15 feet long from nose to tail, with elegant wings folded against her sides and delicate ridges running along her spine. Her head was elongated and graceful, with large closed eyes and small spines framing her skull like a crown, but it was immediately clear that something was terribly wrong. She lay completely still, her breathing so shallow that Marcus had to watch carefully to see the slight rise and fall of her chest. When he approached closer, he could see that her rear legs were twisted at unnatural angles, and a massive scar ran along her spine where scales had been torn away to reveal the wounded flesh beneath. Marcus knelt beside her and carefully checked for vital signs using his medical scanner. The device had been programmed with basic physiological data for most known sapient species, including draconians. Her heart rate was weak but steady, body temperature slightly below normal, and brain activity showed she was unconscious rather than sleeping. More concerning were the readings from her spinal column. The scanner detected massive trauma to her lower vertebrae, with nerve damage that appeared to have severed the connections to her rear legs and tail. She was paralyzed from the middle of her torso downward, and without proper medical treatment, the damage would likely be permanent. As Marcus was studying the scanner readings, the dragon's eyes fluttered open. They were a brilliant amber color, like molten gold, and filled with an intelligence that took his breath away. She focused on him with obvious effort, her pupils dilating as she tried to process what she was seeing. "Please," she whispered, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, speaking perfect standard galactic despite her obvious distress. "Do not let them find me here." Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Most humans had never encountered a draconian outside of diplomatic channels, and certainly not under circumstances like this. The Draconian Empire was officially neutral in the hegemony war, but there were rumors of factions within their government supporting different sides of the conflict. "Who's looking for you?" he asked gently, setting down his medical kit and trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. Her eyes closed again, and for a moment he thought she'd lost consciousness. Then she spoke, her words barely audible. "My own people. They said I was no longer useful to the Empire. A liability that should be disposed of quietly." Marcus felt a surge of anger on her behalf. The Draconian Empire was known for its honor codes and warrior traditions, but apparently those values didn't extend to protecting their own wounded veterans. He'd seen similar callousness in human military organizations, where soldiers were discarded once they could no longer serve effectively in combat roles. "What's your name?" he asked, adjusting the portable atmosphere generator to provide a more comfortable breathing mixture for both of them. "Thessarian Night Whisper," she replied, managing to open her eyes again. "I was a navigator aboard the deep space cruiser Stellar Wind. Until the accident." She didn't elaborate on the nature of the accident, but Marcus could piece together enough from her injuries and her ship's damaged condition. Something had gone catastrophically wrong during a mission, leaving her paralyzed and her vessel barely functional. Instead of providing medical care and support, her government had apparently decided she was no longer worth the expense and effort. "I'm Marcus Chen," he said, offering his hand palm up in the universal gesture of peaceful contact. "I'm the caretaker for this research station." Thessarian regarded his outstretched hand with curiosity before carefully extending one of her own. Her fingers were longer and more delicate than human hands, with retractable claws that she kept carefully sheathed. Her scales felt surprisingly warm and smooth, like polished stone heated by sunlight. "You are human," she observed, her voice growing stronger. "I have heard that your species values compassion over efficiency." "Is this true?" Marcus wasn't sure how to answer that question. Humans were capable of great compassion, but they could also be ruthlessly practical when circumstances demanded it. The ongoing war had brought out both the best and worst aspects of human nature, sometimes in the same individuals. "We try to help when we can," he said finally, "and right now it looks like you could use some help." Thessarian's amber eyes studied his face intently, as if trying to determine whether he was sincere or simply offering empty platitudes. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because some of the tension left her features. "The medical bay is compromised," she said, gesturing weakly toward the rear of the ship with one wing. "The bio-regeneration systems were damaged in the attack. I cannot heal properly without them." Marcus checked his scanner again and frowned at the readings. Her injuries were extensive, and some of the wounds showed signs of infection setting in. Without proper treatment, she might not survive more than a few days, even with her naturally robust draconian constitution. "The station has a full medical facility," he said. "It's designed for human physiology, but the basic life support and surgical equipment should work for your species too. The database has emergency protocols for treating draconian patients." Thessarian's eyes widened in surprise. "You would do this for me? Even though my people and yours are not formally allied?" Marcus stood up and began gathering his equipment. "Politics doesn't matter when someone needs medical attention. Can you move at all? Or am I going to need to find a way to transport you?" She tried to lift her head and upper body, managing to raise herself a few inches off the platform before her strength gave out. "My wings and forelimbs still function, but I cannot feel anything below my middle torso. I am unable to walk or fly." Marcus considered the logistics of moving a 15-foot dragon through the station's corridors. The medical bay was 3 levels down from the docking bay, and the lift systems were designed for human-sized equipment and personnel. Getting Thessarian there would require some creative problem-solving. "I'll need to modify one of the cargo sleds," he said, thinking out loud, "and program a route that avoids the tighter corridor sections. It'll take a few hours to set up properly." "You do not have a few hours," Thessarian said urgently, struggling to focus on his face. "My ship's emergency beacon was damaged in the attack, but not destroyed. If my pursuers detect it, they will come to investigate. You cannot be found harboring me when they arrive." Marcus felt his stomach drop. If agents of the Draconian Empire came looking for Thessarian, they would not be pleased to find a human civilian interfering in their internal affairs. At best, he would face diplomatic sanctions that could ruin his career. At worst, he could be charged with harboring a fugitive and face imprisonment or execution under draconian law. "How long do we have?" he asked. Thessarian closed her eyes and seemed to be concentrating on something. "Perhaps 6 standard hours before the beacon's signal reaches the nearest Imperial patrol. Less if there are ships already in the system." Marcus made his decision without hesitation. "Then we'd better get started." He spent the next hour rigging a makeshift stretcher, using one of the station's large cargo platforms and some emergency padding from the medical supplies. The anti-gravity generators would support Thessarian's weight easily, and the platform was wide enough to accommodate her full wingspan without forcing her to keep her wings uncomfortably folded. Getting her moved from the ship to the platform required careful coordination. Thessarian was able to use her wing muscles to help shift her position, but Marcus had to support most of her weight during the transfer. He was surprised by how light she felt despite her size. Her bones were hollow like a bird's, though much stronger due to the crystalline matrix that reinforced them. Once she was secured on the platform, Marcus carefully guided it through the docking bay and into the station's main corridors. He'd programmed a route that used the widest passages and largest lift systems, though there were still several tight spots where he had to angle the platform carefully to avoid scraping Thessarian's wings against the walls. She remained conscious throughout the journey, though Marcus could see the effort it took for her to stay alert. Her amber eyes tracked their progress through the station, taking in details of human engineering and construction techniques with obvious curiosity. "Your people build very efficiently," she observed as they passed through one of the main laboratory sections. "Everything is straight lines and right angles. Very different from our approach." "Different doesn't necessarily mean better or worse," Marcus replied, concentrating on navigating around a support pillar. "Just different solutions to the same problems." The medical bay was one of the most advanced sections of the station, equipped with diagnostic systems and surgical tools that rivaled anything available on the core worlds. Marcus had received basic medical training as part of his caretaker duties, though he was certainly not qualified to perform major surgery on any species, let alone an injured dragon. He transferred Thessarian to the main examination table, which was designed to extend and adapt to patients of various sizes. The bioscanners immediately began analyzing her condition, displaying detailed holographic images of her injuries on the overhead monitors. The spinal damage was even more extensive than his portable scanner had indicated. Several vertebrae were fractured or completely shattered, and the nerve bundle that controlled her rear legs and tail had been severed in multiple places. There were also signs of internal bleeding and damaged organs that would require immediate attention. "This is beyond what I can treat with the equipment here," Marcus admitted, studying the scan results. "You need a full surgical team and specialized bioregeneration technology." Thessarian was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the holographic display of her ruined spine. "Then I am going to die here," she said matter-of-factly, without any trace of self-pity in her voice. "Not necessarily," Marcus said, pulling up the station's medical database. "The emergency protocols include instructions for stabilizing severe trauma cases until proper help can arrive. I can't fix the spinal damage, but I can treat the internal bleeding and prevent the infections from getting worse." He began preparing the necessary medications and surgical supplies, working with the careful precision of someone who knew that a single mistake could be fatal. Thessarian watched him work, her expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" she asked eventually. "You gain nothing by helping me, and you risk much if my people discover your involvement." Marcus paused in his preparations and looked at her directly. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because you're a living, thinking being who deserves a chance to survive. And because maybe if I were in your position, someone would do the same for me." Thessarian's amber eyes seemed to glow a bit brighter at his words. "Your species truly is strange. Most civilizations would have calculated the risks and abandoned me to preserve themselves." "Then maybe most civilizations are wrong," Marcus said, activating the surgical sterilization field. "Now, I'm going to need you to stay as still as possible while I work. This is going to hurt, and I don't have anything strong enough to provide complete anesthesia for your physiology." She nodded once, then closed her eyes and seemed to enter a meditative state. Her breathing became slower and more regular, and the tension left her features as she prepared to endure whatever pain was necessary. Marcus worked for the next 4 hours, carefully repairing damaged blood vessels and removing fragments of bone and scale from her internal organs. The medical bay's automated systems assisted where they could, but much of the work had to be done by hand with delicate precision instruments. Thessarian never made a sound throughout the entire procedure, even when he had to probe deeply into her wounds to remove debris. Her only reaction was the occasional tensing of her wing muscles when the pain became particularly intense. When he finally finished, Marcus was exhausted and his hands were shaking from the sustained concentration required for such precise work. Thessarian's condition had stabilized. The internal bleeding had stopped, and her vital signs were much stronger, but the spinal damage remained untreatable with the station's equipment. "How do you feel?" he asked, cleaning his instruments and disposing of the surgical waste. Thessarian opened her eyes and took a careful, experimental breath. "Better. The constant pain in my chest has stopped, and I can breathe more easily. You have saved my life, Marcus Chen. I am in your debt." Marcus was about to respond when the station's communication array began receiving an incoming transmission. He felt his blood run cold as he recognized the source. It was a draconian Imperial patrol ship, broadcasting on all frequencies. "Attention, unidentified station," the transmission began, the speaker's voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "We are tracking an escaped criminal who may have taken refuge in your vicinity. You will prepare to be boarded for inspection immediately." Marcus and Thessarian exchanged glances, both knowing that their time had run out. Her pursuers had found them. "Response is required within 5 standard minutes," the transmission continued. "Failure to comply will be considered an act of hostility against the Draconian Empire." Marcus looked at Thessarian, who had gone very still on the examination table. Her amber eyes were wide with fear, though whether for herself or for him he couldn't tell. "There's still time to hide you somewhere," he said quietly. "The station has maintenance shafts and storage areas they might not think to search." Thessarian shook her head slowly. "They will scan the entire station systematically. And if they discover you have hidden me, your fate will be far worse than mine." She paused, her expression growing resolute. "Tell them I forced you to provide medical treatment at gunpoint. Say you had no choice but to comply." "I'm not going to throw you to the wolves to save myself," Marcus said firmly. "Then we will both die for nothing," Thessarian replied. "At least this way, one of us survives to remember what happened here." Marcus stared at her for a long moment, then walked over to the communication console and opened a channel to the approaching ship. Whatever happened next, he'd made his choice and would live with the consequences. "This is Kepler Research Station," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "We acknowledge your transmission and are prepared to receive your boarding party." The die was cast. In a few minutes, Draconian Imperial agents would be aboard the station, and Marcus would discover just how much his decision to help a wounded stranger was going to cost him. But as he looked at Thessarian, seeing the gratitude and respect in her amber eyes, he knew he would make the same choice again without hesitation. That was simply who humans were, for better or worse. And today, he would find out which it would be. The docking bay airlock hissed open with mechanical precision, and 3 figures in dark form-fitting armor emerged into Kepler Station. Marcus watched them through the security monitors, his heart pounding as he took in their imposing presence. Each stood over 7 feet tall, with the distinctive elongated features and scaled skin of the draconian military caste. Their armor was black as space itself, adorned with silver insignia that marked them as Imperial enforcers, the Empire's elite investigation unit. The lead figure removed his helmet, revealing a scarred face and eyes like chips of cold amber. Marcus recognized him from diplomatic files. Commander Vorthak Ironscale, known throughout the galaxy for his ruthless efficiency in hunting down enemies of the Empire. If they'd sent someone of his caliber to retrieve Thessarian, her situation was even worse than Marcus had imagined. "Station Keeper!" Vorthak's voice crackled through the communication system, each word carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Report to Docking Bay 7 immediately. You will be questioned regarding the fugitive we are pursuing." Marcus took a deep breath and looked at Thessarian one last time. She had managed to pull herself into a more dignified position on the medical table, though the effort clearly cost her. Her amber eyes met his with a mixture of gratitude and resignation. "Remember what I told you," she whispered. "Say I threatened you. It is your only chance." "No," Marcus said quietly, adjusting her position on the table to make her more comfortable. "I won't lie about what happened here. If they're going to arrest me, it'll be for telling the truth." Thessarian's eyes widened with something that might have been admiration, though she also looked terrified for his safety. "Your species' capacity for self-sacrifice never ceases to amaze me and worry me. Marcus managed a weak smile as he headed for the door. Maybe that's what makes us human. The walk to the docking bay felt like the longest journey of his life. Each step echoed through the empty corridors, and Marcus found himself thinking about all the paths his life might have taken if he'd made different choices. He could have refused to help the Thessarian, could have hidden in the station's depths until the enforcers left, could have ejected her ship into space and claimed ignorance of the whole affair. But those weren't really choices for him. When faced with someone in need, Marcus had always found it impossible to walk away, even when the smart thing would be to protect himself. It had gotten him into trouble before, defending unpopular students from bullies in school, speaking up against corrupt supervisors at previous jobs, volunteering for dangerous assignments that no one else wanted. His ex-wife had often said it would be his downfall someday. Today might be that day. The three enforcers were waiting in the docking bay, their presence somehow making the vast space feel cramped and threatening. Commander Vorthak stepped forward as Marcus approached, his predatory gaze taking in every detail of the human's appearance and demeanor. "I am Commander Vorthak of the Imperial Enforcement Division," he said, his voice carrying the subtle harmonics that indicated a draconian of high social rank. "You are the caretaker of this facility?" "Marcus Chen. Yes, sir," Marcus replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I've been maintaining the station since the research team was evacuated." "Alone?" Vorthak's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "No other personnel aboard?" Marcus felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine, despite the station's cool, recycled air. This was it. The moment where he either condemned himself with the truth or tried to save himself with a lie. "There was a damaged ship that docked here several hours ago," he said carefully. "The pilot was injured and needed medical attention." The other two enforcers exchanged glances, and Marcus caught the subtle hand signals they used to communicate silently with their commander. Whatever those gestures meant, Vorthak's expression grew even more threatening. "Describe this pilot," Vorthak demanded. "Female draconian, approximately 15 feet in length, emerald and blue scales, severe spinal injuries," Marcus recited. "She identified herself as Thessarian Night Whisper." "And where is this individual now?" Marcus met the commander's amber gaze directly, knowing that any hesitation or evasion would be immediately detected. "In the medical bay. I've been treating her injuries." The silence that followed felt like it lasted for hours, though it was probably only seconds. Vorthak's scarred features showed no emotion whatsoever, making him impossible to read. Finally, he gestured to his subordinates. "Secure the prisoner. I will question the human." The two junior enforcers moved with fluid, predatory grace toward the corridor leading to the medical bay. Marcus felt his stomach clench with worry for Thessarian, but forced himself to remain still and appear cooperative. Any resistance now would only make things worse for both of them. "Walk," Vorthak commanded, indicating that Marcus should lead the way back toward the medical bay. They moved through the station's corridors in tense silence, Marcus acutely aware of the armed enforcer behind him. Vorthak's footsteps were almost silent despite his size and armor, a testament to the predatory nature of his species. Marcus had read that draconians evolved from ambush predators, and their military training emphasized stealth and sudden, overwhelming violence. When they reached the medical bay, they found the other two enforcers standing guard while Thessarian lay motionless on the examination table. She had closed her eyes and appeared to be either unconscious or meditating deeply. The biomonitors showed her vital signs were stable, but weak. "Thessarian Night Whisper," Vorthak said, his voice cutting through the medical bay's quiet hum like a blade. "Formerly Navigator Third Class aboard the deep space cruiser Stellar Wind, charged with desertion, theft of Imperial property, and treason against the Empire." Thessarian's eyes opened slowly, focusing on her former superior with what appeared to be complete calm. Commander Vorthak, I wondered when you would find me. Did you truly believe you could escape justice by hiding among the humans? Vorthak's tone carried a mixture of disappointment and contempt. Your actions have brought dishonor to your clutch and shame to your ancestors. My actions? Thessarian's voice remained steady, but Marcus could hear the underlying anger. I reported what I saw during the mission to the Kepler Nebula. The civilian transports that were destroyed despite flying under flags of truce. The orbital bombardment of evacuation sites. The deliberate targeting of medical facilities. Vorthak's expression didn't change, but his subordinates shifted uncomfortably. Marcus realized he was witnessing a conversation about war crimes, and his presence as a witness made the situation even more dangerous. You reported fabricated intelligence designed to damage the Empire's reputation, Vorthak said coldly. No such incidents occurred during the Kepler operation. I have recordings, Thessarian replied. Complete sensor logs and communication intercepts that prove every word of my report. The Empire's involvement with the hegemony includes systematic violations of the Galactic Accords on the treatment of civilians. Recordings can be falsified. Your word cannot be trusted. Vorthak gestured to his subordinates. Prepare her for transport. The tribunal is waiting. Marcus watched in growing horror as the two junior enforcers began securing restraints around Thessarian's wrists and wings. She submitted without resistance, but her amber eyes found his across the room. In that gaze, he saw not just resignation, but a desperate plea for him to understand something important. The recordings. She was trying to tell him about evidence that could expose war crimes committed by the Draconian Empire in alliance with the hegemony forces. If that evidence disappeared with her, countless more civilian populations might suffer the same fate as those in the Kepler Nebula. Commander, Marcus said, stepping forward despite the obvious danger. If I may ask, what will happen to Thessarian after you take her back to the Empire? Vorthak turned his predatory gaze on Marcus, clearly surprised that a human would dare question him about internal Imperial affairs. That is not your concern, Station Keeper. Will she receive a fair trial? Will her evidence be examined by an impartial tribunal? The temperature in the medical bay seemed to drop several degrees as Vorthak's eyes narrowed dangerously. You forget yourself, human. The internal affairs of the Draconian Empire are not subject to alien scrutiny or opinion. Marcus felt his pulse racing, but pressed on anyway. I'm not questioning the Empire's legal system. I'm asking as someone who provided medical aid to an injured person. I'd like to know that she'll be treated fairly. One of the junior enforcers hissed something in the Draconian language, and Marcus caught enough to understand it was a suggestion that he be arrested for interfering in Imperial business. Vorthak held up a hand to silence his subordinate, his attention fully focused on Marcus now. Tell me, human, Vorthak said, his voice deceptively conversational. When you found this criminal aboard your station, why did you not immediately contact Imperial authorities? Marcus had been dreading this question, knowing that his answer would determine whether he left this encounter as a free man or a prisoner. She was dying from her injuries. Medical ethics required that I provide emergency treatment regardless of any other considerations. Even knowing she was a fugitive from Imperial justice? She told me she was being pursued, yes, but she also told me she was being hunted for reporting war crimes. I couldn't ignore that possibility. The medical bay fell completely silent except for the soft beeping of Thessarian's biomonitors. Vorthak stared at Marcus for a long moment. And Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that the commander was evaluating him the way a predator might assess potential prey. You chose to harbor a known criminal based on unsubstantiated allegations against the Empire, Vorthak said finally. This constitutes interference in Imperial justice and could be construed as an act of hostility against the Draconian government. Marcus felt his mouth go dry, but forced himself to maintain eye contact with the enforcer. I chose to provide medical aid to an injured person while trying to determine the truth of the situation. If that's a crime, then I'm guilty. The truth? Vorthak's scarred features showed the first hint of emotion, a cold amusement that was somehow more frightening than his previous emotionless demeanor. And what truth do you believe you have uncovered? Station keeper? Marcus glanced at Thessarian, who was watching the exchange with obvious tension despite her restrained position. He could see the fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. She was terrified that his attempt to help her would result in his destruction. I believe she's telling the truth about witnessing war crimes, Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. I believe she was paralyzed, trying to protect civilians, and that her own government has abandoned her rather than face the implications of what she discovered. Vorthak's amusement vanished, replaced by something much more dangerous. You accuse the Imperial government of abandoning injured veterans and covering up war crimes. These are serious allegations, human. Yes, they are, Marcus agreed. And if they're false, then a fair investigation will prove that quickly enough. But if they're true, then Thessarian deserves protection, not persecution. The commander was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing his options. Marcus could almost see him calculating the political implications of various courses of action. Arresting a human civilian for harboring a draconian fugitive would create a diplomatic incident with the Galactic Consortium. But allowing Marcus to spread Thessarian's allegations could be even more damaging to the Empire's reputation. You present me with an interesting dilemma, Vorthak said finally. The logical course would be to arrest you both and resolve the matter quietly within Imperial jurisdiction. However, your species has a troublesome tendency to make martyrs of those who die for their principles. Marcus felt a chill at the casual way Vorthak mentioned death, but tried not to let his fear show. I'm not looking to become a martyr. I just want to do what's right. What is right? Vorthak repeated, as if the concept were foreign to him. An interesting philosophical position. Tell me, what would you consider a satisfactory resolution to this situation? The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been expecting arrest, interrogation, possibly execution. But Vorthak seemed to be offering some kind of negotiation, though for what purpose, Marcus couldn't imagine. I want the Thessarian to receive proper medical treatment for her injuries, Marcus said carefully. I want her allegations to be investigated fairly by an impartial authority. And I want protection for any evidence she might have gathered. And in exchange, Marcus thought quickly, trying to understand what the commander might want from him. In exchange, I won't report this incident to consortium authorities unless the Thessarian disappears or is harmed. Vorthak's amber eyes glittered with what might have been respect. You seek to protect someone who is not even of your species, knowing it could cost you everything. Your reputation for irrational altruism appears to be well-founded. It's not irrational to care about justice and protecting the innocent, Marcus replied. Perhaps not, Vorthak conceded, but it is certainly inconvenient for those of us tasked with maintaining order and stability. The commander walked over to Thessarian and looked down at her with an unreadable expression. She met his gaze without flinching, though Marcus could see the tension in her wings and the way her claws had partially extended despite her restraints. Navigator Night Whisper, Vorthak said formally. You stand accused of serious crimes against the Empire. However, your service record prior to these events was exemplary, and your injuries were sustained in the line of duty. The tribunal has authorized me to offer you a choice. The Thessarian's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting any options beyond arrest and execution. What choice? You will surrender all recordings and evidence related to your allegations. You will sign a statement admitting that your reports were based on misinterpreted data and personal trauma from your injuries. In exchange, You will receive full medical treatment for your paralysis and be granted an honorable discharge with pension benefits. The offer hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus could see the temptation in Thessarian's eyes, the chance to regain the use of her legs and tail, to return to something approaching a normal life. But he could also see the moral struggle as she weighed her personal salvation against the greater good. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. "Then you will face trial for treason and desertion. If convicted, the penalty is death, and your evidence will be dismissed as the fabrications of a deranged criminal." Marcus felt his anger building at the commander's casual brutality. "That's not a choice. That's extortion." Vorthak turned his predatory gaze back to Marcus. "Justice and politics are rarely clean or simple. Human. Sometimes the greater good requires difficult compromises. The greater good would be served by investigating war crimes and holding the guilty accountable," Marcus shot back. "Not by silencing the people brave enough to report them." "Brave?" Vorthak's voice carried a hint of mockery. "Or treasonous. How can you be certain which is true when you know nothing of the context or complexities involved?" Marcus looked at Thessarian, seeing the pain and conflict in her amber eyes. She was facing an impossible choice: her integrity and the lives of unknown civilians against her own survival and the chance to walk again. It was the kind of decision that no one should have to make alone. "What if there was a third option?" Marcus asked suddenly. Both Vorthak and Thessarian looked at him with surprise. The commander's expression was particularly dangerous, suggesting that he was growing tired of Marcus's interference. "Explain," Vorthak said, his voice carrying a clear warning. Marcus took a deep breath, knowing he was about to either save them both or doom them all. "What if Thessarian transfers all her evidence to me, along with her formal statement about what she witnessed? As a Galactic Consortium citizen, I have the right to report suspected war crimes to the appropriate authorities for investigation." Vorthak's eyes went cold as frozen space. "And what prevents me from simply arresting you along with her?" "Because I'm not a draconian citizen or military personnel," Marcus replied, praying that his understanding of interstellar law was accurate. "Arresting me would create a diplomatic incident with the consortium, especially if I'm clearly acting as a witness to potential war crimes. And if I disappear after filing a report, it would only lend credibility to the allegations." The commander was silent for a long moment, clearly running calculations in his head. Marcus could practically see him weighing the political costs of various courses of action against the potential benefits. "You would stake your life on unproven allegations made by someone you barely know?" Vorthak asked. "I would stake my life on the principle that war crimes should be investigated regardless of who commits them," Marcus corrected, "and that wounded veterans deserve better than abandonment and threats." Thessarian was staring at Marcus with something approaching awe. "Marcus, you cannot do this. The danger to yourself is worth it," Marcus interrupted gently. "Besides, someone needs to stand up for what's right. Might as well be me." Vorthak studied them both for several more minutes, his scarred features revealing nothing of his thoughts. Finally, he gestured to his subordinates. "Release her restraints. We are leaving." The two junior enforcers looked confused but obeyed immediately, removing the bonds from Thessarian's wrists and wings. She flexed her fingers carefully, working circulation back into her hands. "Commander?" one of his subordinates asked in the draconian language. "The prisoner is no longer our concern," Vorthak replied in standard galactic, clearly intending for Marcus and Thessarian to understand. Navigator Night Whisper was officially declared dead in the line of duty following her ship's destruction. Dead individuals cannot be tried for crimes. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat as he realized what the commander was saying. By officially declaring Thessarian dead, Vorthak was freeing her from imperial jurisdiction while also protecting himself from accusations of letting a traitor escape. However, Vorthak continued, his amber eyes fixed on Marcus. Any evidence or testimony related to alleged war crimes would be considered highly classified Imperial intelligence. Unauthorized distribution of such materials would be considered an act of espionage against the Empire. The message was clear. Marcus could protect Thessarian, but sharing her evidence would put him in mortal danger. It was a compromise that satisfied no one completely, but allowed everyone to walk away alive. "I understand," Marcus said carefully. "Classified materials require proper handling through appropriate channels." "Indeed," Vorthak agreed. "I trust you will ensure all such materials are disposed of safely and completely." Thessarian started to object, but Marcus caught her eye and shook his head slightly. The commander was giving them an out, but only if they were smart enough not to push their luck. "Of course," Marcus said. "I'll make sure everything is handled appropriately." Vorthak nodded once, then turned toward the door. His subordinates fell into formation behind him, their confusion evident, but their discipline absolute. Just before leaving the medical bay, the commander paused and looked back at Marcus. "Your reputation for stubbornness and moral certainty is well deserved, station keeper. I hope for your sake that it does not prove to be your downfall." "Thank you for the warning, Commander." Vorthak's scarred features might have shown a hint of a smile, though it was impossible to be certain. It was not a warning. It was advice. Learn to recognize the difference. With that, the three enforcers left the medical bay, their footsteps echoing through the corridor as they made their way back to the docking bay. Marcus and Thessarian listened in tense silence until they heard the distinctive sound of the Imperial ship's engines powering up and departing from the station. Only then did Marcus allow himself to collapse into a nearby chair, his hands shaking from the adrenaline and stress of the past several hours. Thessarian was watching him with an expression of profound gratitude mixed with concern. "Marcus," she said softly, "what you did was incredibly dangerous and incredibly brave. But you realize that Commander Vorthak's compromise comes with a price?" Marcus nodded wearily. "I can't share your evidence with anyone, or I'll be hunted as a spy. And you're officially dead, which means you can never return to the Empire or resume your old life. More than that," Thessarian continued, "you have made powerful enemies who will be watching for any excuse to eliminate you. And I am now completely dependent on your protection and kindness." Marcus looked at her lying on the medical table, still paralyzed from her injuries, still vulnerable despite their temporary victory over the enforcers. She was right. Their situation was far from resolved. They had won a reprieve, not a permanent solution. "Well," Marcus said, managing a weak smile, "I guess that means we're in this together now. The question is, what do we do next?" Thessarian's amber eyes showed a mix of determination and uncertainty. "I do not know. My old life is gone, my mobility is limited, and my usefulness as a witness has been neutralized. Perhaps it would have been better if you had let me die with honor rather than live with limitations." "Don't say that," Marcus said firmly, standing up from his chair. "Life with limitations is still life. And honor isn't about dying for your principles. It's about living for them, even when it's difficult." He walked over to the medical console and began reviewing her treatment options. The station's medical database includes experimental procedures for spinal regeneration. They're not approved for human use yet, but the theoretical foundation is sound, with some modifications for draconian physiology. Thessarian's eyes widened with something that might have been hope. "You think my paralysis could be reversed?" "I think we're going to find out," Marcus replied, already pulling up research files and technical specifications. "We've got time, we've got equipment, and we've got each other. That's enough to start with." For the first time since he'd found her aboard her damaged ship, Thessarian smiled. an expression that transformed her elegant features and made her eyes shine like molten gold. It was a smile that spoke of renewed hope and growing trust, of two very different beings finding common ground in the vastness of space. Marcus smiled back and got to work. They had a long road ahead of them, but at least they wouldn't be traveling it alone. 3 months had passed since the Imperial enforcers departed Kepler Station, and the transformation of both the facility and its inhabitants was remarkable. What had once been a sterile research outpost now hummed with purpose and innovation, while the unlikely partnership between a human engineer and a paralyzed dragon had evolved into something neither of them could have anticipated. Marcus stood in the renovated medical bay, studying the holographic display of Thessarian's spinal column with intense concentration. The experimental neural regeneration chamber he'd constructed dominated the center of the room, its crystalline matrices glowing with a soft blue light that pulsed in rhythm with Thessarian's heartbeat. After weeks of careful calibration and testing, they were finally ready for the first major treatment attempt. The biomechanical interface looks stable, Thessarian observed from her position beside the chamber, her amber eyes tracking the scrolling data streams on the overhead monitors. Though I still think you're taking unnecessary risks with the quantum resonance frequencies. Marcus smiled at her comment. Over the past months, Thessarian had proven to be not just a patient, but an invaluable research partner. Her deep understanding of draconian biology, combined with her military training in advanced technologies, had been crucial in developing the modified regeneration protocols they were about to test. The frequencies are within acceptable parameters, Marcus replied, making final adjustments to the chamber's neural interface array. Besides, we've run the simulations hundreds of times. The theoretical foundation is solid. Theory and practice are often very different things, Thessarian said dryly, especially when dealing with damaged nerve tissue that's been deteriorating for months. Marcus paused in his work and looked at her directly. Are you having second thoughts about the procedure? We can wait longer if you're not ready. Thessarian was quiet for a moment, her gaze focused on the regeneration chamber with its maze of biocables and quantum processing nodes. The device represented months of collaborative effort, combining human engineering ingenuity with draconian biotech principles to create something entirely new. It is not fear of the procedure that concerns me, she said finally. It is what success might mean for our partnership. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat at the implication of her words. Over the past months, their working relationship had gradually deepened into something more complex and meaningful. They spent their days collaborating on research projects, their evenings discussing philosophy and sharing stories of their respective cultures. Marcus had come to treasure their conversations, their intellectual challenges, and the unique perspective Thessarian brought to every problem they tackled together. Why would success change anything between us? He asked carefully. Thessarian's wing brushed against his arm as she shifted position, a gesture that had become natural between them despite their very different anatomies. Because once I can walk again, once I can fly, I will have choices that are currently unavailable to me. I could leave this station, seek refuge among the neutral worlds, perhaps even find a way to bring the evidence of Imperial war crimes to the proper authorities. Those sound like good choices, Marcus said, though he couldn't keep a note of sadness from creeping into his voice. They are logical choices, Thessarian agreed, but they would mean abandoning the first real home and genuine friendship I have known in years. Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen at her words. You know you'll always have a home here, regardless of whether you can walk or not. And our friendship doesn't depend on your mobility. Thessarian's amber eyes searched his face intently. Friendship. Is that truly what this is between us? Marcus? The question hung in the air like a charged particle field, crackling with unspoken possibilities and implications. Marcus found himself at a loss for words, not because he didn't know the answer, but because the answer was so far outside the normal parameters of either human or draconian society. Over the months they'd spent together, Marcus had found himself developing feelings for Thessarian that went well beyond friendship or professional collaboration. He was drawn to her intelligence, her courage, her dry sense of humor, and the gentle grace with which she'd adapted to her disabilities. The fact that she was a member of a completely different species seemed less and less relevant with each passing day, but expressing those feelings carried risks that went far beyond personal rejection. Interspecies relationships were rare in galactic society, often viewed with suspicion or outright hostility by both cultures involved. There were practical considerations, too. Biological incompatibility, wildly different lifespans, the social isolation that would come from choosing a path that neither species fully accepted. "I think," Marcus said slowly, choosing his words with great care, "that what we have is something unique that doesn't fit neatly into the categories that either of our species normally uses." Thessarian's eyes never left his face as she absorbed his words. "That is a very diplomatic way of avoiding my question." Marcus couldn't help but smile at her directness. "You're right, it was. The honest answer is that my feelings for you have grown well beyond friendship. But I wasn't sure if expressing that would be welcome or appropriate." "Why would it not be appropriate?" "Because you're vulnerable and dependent on me for your safety and well-being," Marcus replied. "Because our species have different concepts of relationships and commitment. Because admitting that I've fallen in love with you could create complications that we're not prepared to handle." Thessarian was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear. "And do these concerns outweigh your feelings?" Marcus met her amber gaze directly. "No, they don't. I love you, Thessarian. Not despite our differences, but because of the amazing person you are, regardless of species or circumstances." The medical bay fell silent except for the gentle humming of the regeneration chamber and the soft beeping of monitoring systems. Thessarian closed her eyes and seemed to be processing his words with the same careful attention she gave to complex engineering problems. "In draconian culture," she said finally, "love is considered a weakness that clouds judgment and leads to poor decisions. We are taught to value respect, compatibility, and mutual benefit over emotional attachment." Marcus felt his heart sink, interpreting her words as a gentle rejection. But then Thessarian opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that made his pulse race. "However," she continued, "the past months have taught me that human concepts of love may not be the weakness I was taught to believe. Your love for me led you to risk your life and career to save someone you barely knew. It motivated you to spend months developing medical technology that might restore my mobility. It has created a partnership that has enriched both our lives in ways I never thought possible." She paused, and one of her elegant hands reached out to cover his much smaller one. Her scales were warm and smooth, and Marcus felt a slight tremor in her fingers that suggested she was as nervous as he was. "I find myself caring for you in ways that transcend simple gratitude or friendship," Thessarian said. "If that is what humans call love, then perhaps I have been infected with this supposed weakness." Marcus felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes as he absorbed her words. "It's not a weakness, Thessarian. It's what makes life worth living." She smiled at him then, that radiant expression that always made his heart skip a beat. "Then perhaps we should proceed with the regeneration treatment so that I can stand beside you as an equal partner rather than someone you must care for." "You're already an equal partner," Marcus protested. "Your mobility doesn't change that." "Perhaps not," Thessarian agreed. "But it will change how I see myself, and how others see us together. Marcus understood what she was saying. As long as she was paralyzed and dependent on his care, there would always be questions about the nature of their relationship. Was she with him by choice or necessity? Was he taking advantage of someone who had no other options? The uncertainty would poison any future they tried to build together. "All right," Marcus said, squeezing her hand gently. "Let's get you walking again." The preparation process took another hour as they ran final system checks and verified that all the neural interface connections were properly calibrated. The regeneration chamber would flood Thessarian's damaged spinal cord with specialized nanobots designed to rebuild nerve connections at the cellular level. The process would be guided by quantum-mapped neural patterns derived from healthy draconian specimens, essentially providing a template for her body's natural healing mechanisms to follow. It was cutting-edge technology that pushed the boundaries of what was medically possible. And the risks were significant. If something went wrong, Thessarian could suffer permanent brain damage or even death. But without treatment, her condition would only continue to deteriorate as her unused muscles atrophied and her damaged nerves died. "Remember," Marcus said as he helped her position herself within the chamber, "the nanobots will need several hours to map your neural pathways before they can begin reconstruction. You'll need to remain completely motionless during that phase." "I have been motionless for months," Thessarian replied with dry humor. "I think I can manage a few more hours." Marcus sealed the chamber and activated the primary systems, watching as the interior filled with a soft, breathable mist that would carry the nanobots directly to her damaged spine. Thessarian closed her eyes and began the meditative breathing techniques that would help her remain calm during the procedure. The first phase proceeded smoothly, with the nanobots successfully mapping the extent of her injuries and identifying the specific nerve pathways that needed reconstruction. Marcus monitored the process from the control console, tracking thousands of data streams that showed the tiny robots beginning their delicate work. "Neural mapping complete," he announced after 3 hours. "Beginning reconstruction sequence." This was the dangerous part. The nanobots would now begin rebuilding damaged nerve tissue, a process that required precise coordination and could trigger dangerous immune responses if anything went wrong. Marcus watched the monitors intently, ready to abort the procedure at the first sign of complications. Hour by hour, the nanobots worked their microscopic magic. Dead nerve tissue was carefully removed and replaced with healthy cells grown from Thessarian's own genetic template. Damaged nerve sheaths were repaired, allowing electrical signals to flow freely along previously blocked pathways. Scar tissue that had formed around the injury sites was gradually dissolved and replaced with healthy spinal cord material. Marcus barely left the control console during the 18-hour procedure, surviving on stimulants and determination as he monitored every aspect of Thessarian's treatment. She remained motionless in the chamber, her vital signs steady, but showing the strain of the intensive cellular reconstruction taking place within her spine. As the final hours of treatment approached, Marcus began detecting the first signs of restored neural activity below the injury site. Electrical impulses that had been blocked for months were now flowing freely along reconstructed nerve pathways. The monitors showed muscle activation in her legs and tail as her nervous system began reconnecting with previously paralyzed areas. "Thessarian," Marcus said softly, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "The nanobots are finishing their work. Can you try moving your rear legs?" Inside the chamber, Thessarian's eyes opened slowly. She seemed disoriented at first, then focused on Marcus with growing awareness. "I can feel them," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "My legs. I can feel my legs again." Marcus watched in fascination as her powerful leg muscles began to twitch and flex. After months of paralysis, her nervous system was relearning how to control her lower body. It would take time and physical therapy to rebuild her strength and coordination, but the neural connections were clearly functioning. "Try to move your tail," Marcus suggested, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. Thessarian's elegant tail, which had hung limp and lifeless for so long, began to move with slow, deliberate motions. She could lift it, curl it, even use the fine muscles at its tip to grip objects placed within reach. Tears of joy ran down her scaled cheeks as she realized the full extent of her recovery. "It worked," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Marcus, it actually worked." Marcus began the careful process of bringing the regeneration chamber offline, his hands shaking with exhaustion and excitement. The nanobots had completed their mission and were now being flushed from her system by her natural immune responses. All the readings showed successful neural reconstruction with no signs of rejection or adverse reactions. When the chamber finally opened and the mist cleared, Thessarian slowly sat up for the first time in months. The movement was awkward and uncertain, but she was able to support her own weight and maintain her balance without assistance. Her amber eyes were bright with tears and triumph. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked, standing beside the chamber ready to help if she needed support. "Weak," Thessarian admitted, slowly swinging her legs over the side of the treatment platform. "My muscles have atrophied significantly, but I can feel everything. Pressure, temperature, pain. All the sensations I thought I had lost forever." She carefully lowered her feet to the floor and attempted to stand, her legs trembling with the effort of supporting her weight. Marcus moved to help her, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Please," she said. "Let me try on my own first." Marcus stepped back and watched as Thessarian fought to find her balance. Her first few attempts ended with her having to grab the edge of the treatment platform for support, but gradually her strength and coordination began to return. Finally, after several minutes of careful effort, she stood unassisted in the center of the medical bay. "I'm standing," she said, her voice filled with amazement. "I'm actually standing." Marcus felt his own eyes filling with tears as he watched her take her first tentative steps. Her gait was unsteady and she had to rest frequently, but she was walking under her own power for the first time since her accident. The sight was more beautiful than anything he'd ever witnessed. "You did it," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're walking again." Thessarian managed to make it across the small medical bay before exhaustion forced her to sit down on a nearby chair. But her smile was radiant, and her amber eyes shone with a happiness that transformed her entire being. "We did it," she corrected gently. "None of this would have been possible without your knowledge, your dedication, and your faith in the impossible." Marcus pulled up another chair beside her, suddenly feeling the full weight of his own exhaustion. The past months had been the most challenging and rewarding of his life, pushing him to develop technologies and techniques that existed only in theoretical research papers. "What happens now?" he asked, settling into his chair with a tired sigh. Thessarian was quiet for a moment, flexing her newly restored legs and testing her range of motion. "Now I begin the long process of rebuilding my strength and relearning skills I thought I had lost forever. And we discover what kind of future is possible for two very different beings who somehow found love among the stars." She reached over and took his hand in hers, intertwining their fingers despite the obvious differences in size and anatomy. "If you are still willing to share that future with me." Marcus lifted their joined hands to his lips and kissed her scaled knuckles gently. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be, and no one else I'd rather be with." Thessarian's smile could have powered the station's reactor core. "Then perhaps it is time we began planning for that future. I have some ideas about how we might use our combined knowledge to help others who have been abandoned by their governments." "Oh?" Marcus asked, intrigued by the thoughtful expression on her face. There are others like me, Thessarian explained. Veterans from multiple species who have been cast aside because their injuries make them inconvenient or expensive to treat. If we could establish a medical facility that specializes in treating cases the mainstream systems have given up on... Marcus felt excitement building as he understood where she was going with the idea. A refuge for the abandoned. Using experimental techniques and technologies that the established medical systems are too conservative to attempt. Exactly, Thessarian said, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. We have already proven that seemingly impossible recoveries are achievable with the right combination of technology and determination. Imagine what we could accomplish with proper funding and equipment. Marcus squeezed her hand, already beginning to envision the possibilities. We could help people who have nowhere else to turn, give hope to those who have been written off by their own societies. And perhaps, Thessarian added quietly, we could create a place where differences in species or background matter less than the shared desire to heal and help others. Marcus understood the deeper meaning behind her words. The facility she was proposing would be more than just a medical center. It would be a symbol of what was possible when beings from different worlds chose cooperation over conflict, love over prejudice. It would take years to develop, Marcus said, considering the practical challenges involved. We'd need funding, personnel, official recognition from multiple governments. All achievable goals, Thessarian replied confidently. I still have contacts within the draconian medical establishment who might be willing to provide unofficial support. And your success in treating my injuries will serve as powerful evidence for our capabilities. Marcus looked around the medical bay that had become their shared laboratory and home, seeing it now as the birthplace of something much larger than either of them had originally imagined. What had started as an emergency rescue had evolved into a partnership that could change lives across the galaxy. There's something else to consider, Marcus said carefully. If we become successful and visible, we're going to attract attention from the Imperial enforcers again. Commander Vorthak's protection only extends as long as we remain insignificant. Thessarian nodded thoughtfully. Then we will need to ensure that we become too significant to eliminate safely. If our medical facility gains enough recognition and treats patients from enough different species, taking action against us would create a diplomatic crisis that even the Empire would hesitate to provoke. Marcus admired her strategic thinking, though he couldn't help but worry about the risks they would be taking. And if they decide the diplomatic costs are acceptable? Thessarian's amber eyes showed a hardness that reminded Marcus that she was a trained military officer, regardless of her current civilian status. Then they will discover that a paralyzed dragon is much easier to deal with than one who has regained full mobility and has very little left to lose. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the station's communication array. Marcus checked the incoming message and felt his eyebrows rise in surprise. It's from the Galactic Consortium Medical Board, he said, reading the transmission details. They're requesting information about our experimental neural regeneration techniques. Thessarian's eyes widened. How could they possibly know about our research? Marcus pulled up the full message and scanned its contents quickly. Apparently, word of our success has reached some interesting places. They're offering official research grants and institutional support if we're willing to share our methodology with other medical facilities. That was faster than I expected, Thessarian said, her expression mixing surprise with satisfaction. Perhaps our future is arriving sooner than we anticipated. Marcus felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation as he considered the implications of the message. Official recognition would provide them with resources and protection they could never achieve on their own. But it would also mean scrutiny from governments and organizations that might not approve of their unconventional partnership. Are you ready for this? He asked Thessarian. Once we accept official backing, There's no going back to the quiet life we've built here. Thessarian slowly stood up from her chair, her movements still careful but growing stronger with each attempt. She walked over to the observation window that looked out on Xerion Prime's swirling clouds and its dancing auroras. "I have been thinking about this moment since the day you first chose to help me," she said, her gaze fixed on the majestic view outside. "You could have turned me away, reported me to the authorities, or simply waited for me to die. Instead, you chose to risk everything for someone you didn't know." She turned to face him, her amber eyes blazing with determination and love. That choice changed both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. Now it is time to make another choice that could change many more lives. Marcus joined her at the observation window, slipping his arm around her waist as they stood together, looking out at the stars. She leaned against him, her scales warm against his skin, and he marveled at how natural their physical affection had become. "Together?" he asked. "Always together," Thessarian confirmed, her tail curling around his legs in a gesture of draconic affection. "We are going to show the galaxy that love, compassion, and determination can overcome any obstacle." Marcus activated the communication console and began composing their response to the Consortium Medical Board. As he typed, he thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment, from desperate strangers to partners to lovers to something entirely new in galactic society. They would face challenges and opposition from those who couldn't understand or accept what they represented. There would be political pressures, social disapproval, and undoubtedly more visits from imperial enforcers or their equivalents from other governments. But they would face those challenges together, with the knowledge that their love had already achieved the impossible once. If a paralyzed dragon could learn to walk again through the dedication of a stubborn human engineer, then perhaps anything was possible. As Marcus finished their response and transmitted it to the consortium, Thessarian nuzzled his neck with her scaled snout, a gesture of affection that would have been incomprehensible to either of their species just months before. "Thank you," she whispered against his ear. "For what?" "For staying," she said simply. "For not abandoning me when everyone else had." Marcus turned in her arms and looked into her golden eyes, seeing there a future that neither of them could have imagined alone. "Thank you for giving me the chance to stay." Outside the observation window, Xerion Prime continued its ancient dance through space, its moons casting ever-changing patterns of light and shadow across the gas giant's swirling atmosphere. It was a view that would never grow old, Marcus thought, especially when shared with someone who understood that the most beautiful things in the universe often came from the most unlikely combinations. The paralyzed dragoness had indeed been abandoned by her own people, but she had been found by someone who understood that love meant staying, no matter how difficult or dangerous the consequences might be. And in the end, that simple act of staying had transformed them both into something greater than either could have become alone. Their story was just beginning.